Yeah, so free will. I want to give a little bit of a quick overview for us and for the audience. Did some research last night, so we're all on the same page. Basically, for those who don't know, free will is essentially the ability to choose between different possible courses of action. That's according to Wikipedia, and that's basically just saying free will is, do humans have a choice? Can they choose to do things? Do they have choice? And so one related idea to free will is the idea of determinism, which essentially says that, everything in the world just obeys the laws of physics, and therefore there only can be one possible outcome and everything is just determined by the laws of physics, right? And so there are two main camps of free will. There are the incompatibilists and the compatibilists. So the incompatibilists say that determinism and free will cannot coexist. So the hard determinists say that this is now a subset of incompatibilism. The hard determinists say, okay, determinism is true, therefore free will cannot exist. Okay? And then you have on the other side, you have the metaphysical libertarians who say that free will free will is true, therefore determinism cannot exist. Okay, so those are the two camps of the incompatibilists. The two main.
You really did do your research.
I don't mess around.
Put all these vague ideas and you've actually put them in camps.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Very
so
nice.
then you have the compatibilists who say no, free will and determinism can coexist together. So I mean we can unpack that more, but that's the essential idea that no, like these two things can be true at the same time. Okay.
Brendan, how do you feel about these? Where do you stand?
There's one more.
There's
one more that
is there another camp?
There's a little bonus camp that I want to bring up. Bonus camp.
Summer camp.
So then you have the hard incompatibilists who say, okay, no. Free will cannot exist whether or not determinism exists. So if determinism exists and everything's governed by the laws of nature, free will cannot exist. Or if there is no determinism because there are quantum effects and there's randomness and all these things, it doesn't matter because that doesn't imply free will because it's random. That's the general idea. So laid it all out, or it laid out the main camps. Brendan, what are your initial thoughts? What do you think?
So I'd say, honestly, from the start, I'm coming in with almost a compatibilist kind of, and this is due to, I'd say, how vague I find a lot of these definitions.
Yeah.
It's the specific scope of determinism is why I'm willing to associate that as it being able to exist in the same space as free will. Because yes, they are kind of antithetical to each other, but that depends on how you define them in this specific breadth of control that like determinism has, whether it's like literally every single event is preordained or if there's just a general flow of what occurs. I think you can balance those pretty well depending on where you choose to place your bets.
Well, I think this gets to another really important thing is I think we actually really need to define what free will is. Like I think outside of determinism, all these things, I think free will just on its own has a definition, and I think it's really hard to figure out what that definition is.
Okay.
And I think that's a good starting point. So I like one definition is that free will is somehow that the mind has the ability to make choices,
right,
independent of either physical processes or independent of this is part of the reason I find this conversation simpler than I think most, because I don't know how to define free will from that standpoint. I don't think there's a logical way to define free will.
Interesting. So like you don't actually think that, well, not think, but you don't know exactly what the definition of free will would be because you don't.
It just doesn't make logical sense to me.
Okay.
This is okay.
So you're considering yourself a compatibilist. Does that imply that you think there's a possibility that free will exists?
Yes.
What is that? What is that?
I would say that free will is it's kind of the ability to choose and navigate a path. And it does kind of vary if you get into the biological choices, because there is significant influence from, a lot of the different chemicals in the brain, all the different like receptors, everything's interacting, bouncing back and forth. You've got the stimuli. but I think there is a degree of interaction in how there are so many different there's all these different systems combining together, and I just think there's a way that I'd put it that I was thinking about before coming here is that it's like a kind of a belief that I'd say I have is that like humans are like innately hypocritical. And I think that is kind of an integral part of this free will, is that it's like it's the ability to kind of do things that aren't always the logical, rational thing to do, yet at the same time not necessarily the most compassionate thing. And I just think that weird balance kind of seems to lean towards a free will. And even if that is purely biological, there's a degree of, I don't have the right word for it, but there's just something kind of that I see special about that leans towards this kind of metaphysical free will.
Yeah, would you? What do you mean by that exactly? The metaphysical free will.
Well, I mean,
What would that look like?
just treating free will as an idea is the way that I'm putting it, like as this kind of concept of free will, because it is hard to define. We don't know everything about how the brain functions, the existence of like what the human consciousness is versus the computer that is our brain.
Yeah.
I guess I still see it as I think you can trace as far back to this idea as free will as you want. Like you can take out a lot of the physical stuff. You can make it purely philosophical. I don't feel like it has a lot of meaning, because I feel like whether or not like you can make the point that we're hypocritical, or we don't act always in compassion, or we don't always act even logically, but we're still acting for a reason. I don't think there's any choices you make that are for a lack of reason. And I think that. So I like that reasoning basis for every decision. I think right there shows you like, okay, if we're doing things because of reason, where does free will fit in? Where there just doesn't seem to be any room for something that you could define as free will.
Well, like the way that I look at it is, I do think there's free will, but I think that it's not based on whether or not it will or won't happen. It's based on like a probability. Like we talk about people, they're most likely to do this. Because like if you think about like the randomness of the universe at like a really base level, you can only probabilistically. Okay. Yeah, sure.
We'll accept it.
Yeah, we'll accept that pronunciation of the word. You can only probabilistically like say that something's going to happen. If you take all the particles in the universe and try and calculate what they're going to do, you would have like almost infinite computing power, which you would need, which is not possible, essentially. Sure. So if you try and optimize that, then you're going to be using probability instead of hard calculation.
I have many thoughts on this.
Okay.
So I've been toying with the idea of determinism for a little bit. And so essentially like Newtonian determinism is like, this was sort of like believed a while ago. I believe that it's since been disproven from quantum mechanics, but it essentially says, okay, everything obeys Newton's laws of motion, which we now know is not true. But it's like if you could take, every particle in the universe and just simulate what it would do, and let's just say you had infinite computing power, you had infinite resources, all of these things. Right? This is a very theoretical thing. This is not possible. But if you could simulate every particle interaction at infinitesimally small timescales and do that forever, and from the Big Bang till now, everything will be determined, right? And that idea is called Laplace's demon. That was from the mathematician Laplace, I believe. And that's the idea that like, this is before they had computers, so they're like, okay, there's like the demon called Laplace's demon that can predict the future. That's what this idea is, that everything's determined. But like you have quantum effects. So like, and that what that boils down to is like, instead of being able to pinpoint, okay, the electron like of an atom is here.
Yeah.
We can't we can't say definitively where it is. we can say, like what you said, probabilistically, we can assign probabilities to where we think
electron clouds.
Exactly, right? So that idea alone, in my mind at least, kind of shuts down the idea of like complete physical determinism. But going with the incompatibilist view, that doesn't matter, at least the incompatibilist view that doesn't matter, because even if there are random effects, that doesn't imply free will. That doesn't right make room for free will, because even if it's not determined, it's still random. There's no
Yeah, I don't,
choice
like
coming.
there's always that piece of it. Like you can say, okay, there's randomness. Okay, there probably is randomness. How does free will come out of randomness? What effect does that have? Why is that useful to define randomness as being some kind of free will?
Right.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the main thing that I would say, kind of counter to Liam, is that I think the major difference that I've kind of seen from the discussion is you take like a purely secular view to determinism, whereas like I kind of take a bit more of the spiritual in kind of the presence of like a consciousness, and it's like what is the mind and the ability to choose, because you're viewing it in, obviously, you know, as soon as you go spiritual, everything's purely hand wavy, but I think as soon as you escape the bounds of like what we know of science, then yeah, free will is entirely possible if you believe that there is the existence of some mind, some entity controlling the flesh robot that we are.
Right.
Ooh, I think I disagree with that again, because I think, okay, let's say there's some metaphysical spirit controlling or giving some level of advice to you.
Yeah.
Where's the free will in that? Why does that thing make decisions?
Well,
No. You would be the spirit.
No, you-
okay,
I'm not a marionette.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, why does your spirit make decisions?
Because it can.
But why does it make the decision? What's the difference between a spirit making decisions or a physical process in your mind, like as far as the free will conversation goes?